Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I'm the host of Reformed GGA, and I'm here to do a post-shooting update on my Palmetto State Armory AK-103. I've already done a previous video on this, which I talked about the basic forms and features, and basically all the things that you can tell about a gun without having shot it yet. So I can talk about where it fits in the world of AKs. I can talk about where it fits relative to other Palmetto State Armory products and things like that. But I can't tell you how it shoots if I haven't actually shot it yet. So that's why we have this video. So that's where this video is primarily going to go. It's going to focus on how was it to shoot. But before I get into that, I do need to rehash a little bit of material from the previous video in saying that this gun was not 100% ready to shoot out of the box. I've learned with the Palmetto State Armory AKs that if you can pull the charging handle back such that it locks over the hammer like it is right now, that can create issues. It needs to be loose enough for the Palmetto State Armory AKs that when you take the gun and transition to horizontal, it should come forward on its own, which it is doing now. It was not doing that previously, and if you watch the previous video, I do that same demonstration where I pull the charging handle back and it sticks, and I lower it to the horizontal and it doesn't go forward on its own. I have to tap it forward. Okay, I fixed the problem that it had. Like I said, based on my experience with other Palmetto State Armory AKs that I've owned, if it doesn't pass that test, you are very likely to get stovepipe and possibly feeding malfunctions. But if you can get it to pass the test, as I just did, then it usually functions just fine in the field. And how did I get it to pass that test? Pretty simple. I talked about it in the other video, but people are going to be curious as to what happened, and so I'll go ahead and show you guys. I'm just taking off the dust cover and taking out the recoil spring now. Let's go ahead and talk about the main parts here. Alright, so you'll see that, of course, this bolt carrier on the back end is primarily black, but there's this one bottom section here that is in the white that I've completely taken off the coating on, and that's because I filed it. So I filed on the rear, I filed the bottom, I filed the fronts. I of course did not file the actual bolt itself, that's not necessary. However, there are still now basically white spots on the bolt carrier, and I talked about this in the previous video. I found out that with the Palmetto State Armory guns that this coating that they put on the bolt isn't super durable. It starts to wear off, and in a few thousand rounds it'll start looking pretty white. It won't be completely off in a few thousand rounds, but it'll be pretty much white. Considerably more white even than this, and this is already starting to get quite a bit of white just from the little bit of shooting that I was able to do. And no, this is not a high endurance count shooting video. This is just how did it feel when shooting. The higher round count numbers will have to come down later because ammo prices are what they are right now, so being able to put as much ammo through as I'd like through the gun will take a little bit more time. I was only able to put about 3 magazines through the gun just so that we have a proper context here. Only about 90 rounds, so this is not an endurance test. This is not checking for malfunction rate or anything like that. This is just how did it feel to shoot it. But even with that relatively low round count, you can already see parts of that bolt carrier that are turning white. And like I said, I filed on the bottom of the bolt carrier in order to get it to function correctly. That was a necessary thing, and I've talked about that in the previous video, that you have to file things down. And the bottom of the bolt carrier is one thing, and then the other thing that you need to file on is the hammer, and you will see that is basically the only white thing in there, and it's white because I did a bit of filing on it so that it would pass that test that I talked about. Pull it back, get it to lock in place while it's more or less upright. Lower it to the horizontal and it should come forward on its own. If it does, you're good to go. If it doesn't, it could cause problems. And me, I don't like going to the range and finding out that my gun has problems. It becomes very frustrating for me. So now, as opposed to how I did things before, I just head it off at the pass, as it were, and go ahead and fix it. Now, this is not going to be necessarily the same procedure for all AKs. There are some AKs that you can take and they'll lock back like that, but and even if you lower it to horizontal, and they don't come forward, it won't necessarily affect their actual firing function. Different AKs react differently. My experience with the Palmetto State Armory AKs is that they have to pass that test. That's not true of all AKs. But it would be something that I would probably do just to be on the safe side. Having an AK that has a real slick action is just nice, you know. If it's not gritty, if it doesn't have to be gritty, and you can just rest assured knowing that you're not going to have major problems with stovepipe and possibly failure to feed malfunctions, why not, you know? So I went ahead and got ahead of that issue, and then I was able to go out and shoot it. Trying to get the dust cover on here. There we go. Those dust covers are a tight fit on these PSA guns. But okay, so that's what I did to get this thing ready to shoot. And in terms of what I was able to cycle through the gun, I was actually sufficiently impressed. You would expect that an AK, and especially an AK in 7.62x39, should be able to fire most, if not all, of the major ammos that are out there. Most of them won't do terribly well with a lot of the subsonic ammunition, but any supersonic ammunition they usually do pretty well on. And I did not find this thing to be an exception to that rule at all. With the modification that I made to the underside of the bolt carrier and, of course, the hammer, I found that it fed everything that I gave it. Like I said, I put 3 magazines through it, so it wasn't a super in-depth test. A couple of the magazines were 122 grain Tula ammunition because right now it's basically the easiest ammo to replace. And with ammo being what ammo is right now, it's kind of a big thing. And then I had one magazine that was basically just a hodgepodge of pretty much everything that I could get a hold of. So I had some 122 grain ammunition, some 123, some 124, some 125, and it fed everything in that magazine just fine. It was a mix of the Tula, it was a mix of a couple of different types of Wolf ammunition, some Barnaul, and also some soft points. That was the Wolf soft points in particular, but it fed all of that just fine, no problems, no malfunctions. Now, granted, it's not a super high round count, and it was just one magazine that was of this mixture, so we can't really hang our hats on it too much, but what it does indicate is that it is functioning like we would expect it to function. So it doesn't seem to be particularly ammo sensitive at this point, and that is a good sign. Now, in terms of performance, in the previous video, I stated that I was very concerned about the furniture that was on this gun, and to a large extent that proved to be, those areas of concern proved to be merited areas of concern, but with one exception would probably be the handguard. In the previous video, I complained about these kinds of handguards being really easy to slip on. You slip too far forward and you make contact with the metal rings up front and you burn your hand on that. You slip too far rearward and you burn yourself on the metal ring on the rear. Maybe you slip down way too much and you actually get onto the receiver, and after a decent number of rounds that will start to heat up as well and you can burn yourself there. So I just don't like these slick ones. At least that was my experience in the past when I was first getting into AKs. What I found shooting yesterday, though, because that's when I did my testing, shooting yesterday, I actually didn't find that I had any problems burning myself with this handguard. Now, maybe that just means that I've gotten used to shooting AKs, and so I know where to hold to prevent myself from getting burned and things like that. That's probably what it does mean. But it didn't wind up being as big of an issue as I thought it would be, and the grooves that the lower handguard has in it actually proved to provide a decent enough purchase. It actually proved to be very functional. Now, it does have some very obvious downsides in that it in and of itself doesn't really have any mounting options on it. It's not like I can use it to attach a white light, which is what I would prefer. So I'm still probably going to wind up changing out the handguard to something else that is something that you can attach other things to. But it turned out to be a lot more functional than I thought it was going to be, and the issue with burning myself just turned out not to be there. Now, I don't think that other people would necessarily have that experience, especially if they're brand new to AKs. I think that that would still be a concern about burning yourself on either end and whatnot. If you're not used to AKs, having something that's easy to slip up and down on, I think would still be an issue. But for me, having a bit more experience with AKs, turned out not to be as big of an issue as I thought it was. like I said, I still plan on changing out these handguards for something that has a little bit more of an edge to keep me from sliding up and down, and something that has options for mounting, because I'm probably not going to be the only person to ever shoot this gun. I do go out shooting with friends fairly often, and it's nice to think ahead for what was going to be useful for people that aren't used to AKs, so I'll probably still make those adjustments. But if this was a one-man gun and I wasn't worried about mounting a white light or something like that to the fore end of the gun, I could actually see myself just dealing with this fore end as is. It's lightweight, it's fairly sleek, and it's actually a lot more functional than I thought it would be. So in the realm of pleasant surprises, this foregrip is not as bad as I thought it would be. I think a lot of that is due to my experience with other AKs and just being used to what a safe, non-burny grip feels like. But turns out that it's actually a lot better than I thought it would be. Moving to the other bits of furniture, though, they basically failed in the way that I thought they would fail. The pistol grip, like I mentioned in the last video, is a very, very thin pistol grip. And in terms of actually being on target shooting, it's not bad at all. It's very functional that way. My problem is that I chose to run this thing without a sling, which I fairly often do when I'm at the range. You know, if I think that I'm going to be in the field for a prolonged period of time, yeah, I'll put a sling on it for that purpose. But if all I'm going to be doing is just going to the range and walking up and down to check targets, I usually don't bother with it. And it started to wear on me then, because when I'm going up to check targets, I was usually doing a high hold like this, and you have the weight of the gun sitting on your hand. And that very, 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 very thin grip with all the weight of the gun, plus, of course, a loaded magazine, it really starts to wear on you after a little while and becomes very unpleasant. It's a lot of pressure in a relatively small place, and it got to be a less than pleasant. Manageable, and if I had had a sling, it would not have been an issue at all. But just given the way that I typically have these things, if I set up an AK for home defense, I usually don't put a sling on it. If I go to the range with an AK and all I'm doing is just range stuff, I usually don't have a sling on it. The only time when I put a sling on a gun is when I think I'm going to be in the field for a prolonged period of time, just so that I don't have to carry it around all the time. And so for some people, this will not be an issue at all, because for some people, as soon as they get the gun, they put a sling on it, and that's the primary way that they carry it. The pistol grip is only there for when you're actually firing. For those kind of people, probably won't be an issue at all. But for me, I usually wind up carrying the gun without a sling because I don't put a sling on it. And so it's either a high carry or it's down low to the side. In either one of those positions, you wind up bearing a lot of the weight of the gun on that pistol grip. And this paintbrush style pistol grip is very thin, and so yeah, that's going to have to change. I'm probably going to go with one of the Magpul grips because they're a little bit more hand-filling. They'll have a little bit better functional circumference. And then the absolute worst piece of furniture was this stock. Now, I will say right off that it was the problem with this stock can be fixed very readily, but it just goes to show how unpleasant, or rather pleasant, a gun can be to shoot based on the stock. I complained in the last video that this stock was fairly thin and that the end plate is very hard. It's hard metal, and I figured that that was probably not going to be a pleasant shooting experience, and that was borne out. Within about 15 rounds, this stock really started digging into me, and I actually have a bruise to prove it. It was just not a pleasant shooting experience at all. I've shot AKs a lot, and most AKs I don't have any major problems with if you have a good stock on there that has you know, a little bit of absorption, you know, a little bit of rubber, and especially if they're wider. The more surface area you have on your stock, the more pleasant it is going to be to shoot that gun. And this stock is basically all the wrong combinations. It is a very thin stock. And it's also not very long either, and it is a very hard metal. It's like the worst possible combination that you could have for a stock. Okay, so it was not pleasant at all. Like I said, within half a magazine, it was already starting to dig into me. I went for at least 3 full magazines. Might have been a couple of partials in there as well, because I bring spare ammo along, and sometimes I'll throw a few into a spent magazine and do some other things. But at least 3 full magazines went through the gun. and into my shoulder, and this thing just absolutely awful. But like I said, it's not an overly difficult fix. This is a 4-inch stock, a 4-inch butt plate at least, and so you should be able to go to a good many gun stores that sell accessories for shotguns. A lot of times they will have little rubber pads that you can put on the end of a shotgun, and a 4-inch pad, because that's how long this thing is, a 4-inch pad should fit on this thing just fine and really save your shoulder. So as far as the stock configuration of the gun is concerned, foregrip did a lot better than expected. The handle is an issue if you carry by the hand. The pistol grip is an issue if you carry by the pistol grip a lot. That's going to vary from person to person. Some people prefer to use slings. Some people don't really worry about slings. For me, it depends on the situation. So that can be an issue, but that one's going to depend more on your philosophy of use. The stock, though, I don't care who you are, a small, thin, hard butt plate is not going to be pleasant for anyone. If you choose to run it in its stock configuration, please do yourself a favor and go and get a rubber butt pad to put on the end of this thing. It's probably not going to be very expensive, you know, like somewhere between $5 and $20. Makes the gun a whole lot more pleasant. Just do yourself that favor right off the bat and do that. If you want to use the stock furniture, getting a rubber butt pad is easily the cheapest, most effective way to make the gun functional for you and for a wide variety of other people. Okay. In terms of the actual shooting experience itself and the recoil, other than the stock being way too thin and hard and those kinds of things, it actually wasn't bad. In terms of being able to look at a near target, pull the trigger, hit the near target, and then being able to easily transition to another target without having to wildly get it down or being able to go back to that same target, it was actually really good. And most of that is due to the brake that they have on this thing. As far as I know, it's not a true AK-103 brake, but it is very similar, and it gives you very similar performance. It does a very good job of keeping the gun nice and level while you're shooting. Now, it's still an intermediate rifle caliber. There's still going to be a bit of vibration, a bit of jumping around, and of course the recoil system, not recoil system, but the operating system on this gun is such that it's going to produce a little bit of jaggedness, if you will, when you shoot, because you have a piston on top of the gun that's going to be moving not quite in line with the barrel itself. It's over the barrel, so you're going to get some additional movement just because of that, and there's only so much that you can do for that. The operating system itself is going to give you a limit on just how flat and level shooting you can make the gun. But within the mechanical constraints of the operating system, this brake allowed me to either stay on a target or to easily transition to another target quite well. I was actually very impressed with this thing. And I was comparing it to my Palmetto State Armory GF3 that I already kind of have not quite tricked out, but kind of tricked out. That gun, I have the fighter brake that the AK Operator Union store sells. It's a $40 brake. It's not a very expensive brake at all. Huge improvement over the slant brakes that a lot of these guns normally come with, a lot of AKs normally come with. Go ahead and show that to you guys here. All right, here's the one I'm talking about. This is the fighter brake that I was talking about, and this is also a very good muzzle device. However, I would not say that this one is good as it is, and it is good. I wouldn't say that it is good as the brake that I have on the new AK-103. And I've said in other videos that the AK-103 from Palmetto is not actually a true 103, but you can see my previous video for details on that. But it is better. Now, how much better, I still have a hard time saying, because the effect was definitely dampened by the butt stock being less than pleasant to deal with. So in terms of how level I could keep it and those kinds of things, they were actually pretty much neck and neck, with a slight advantage to going to this one. If I had a more comfortable stock, and especially if I had a stock that was more in line instead of being a drop stock like this one is, I think that that the difference in muzzle brakes would be that much more pronounced. Right now it's a little bit better than the fighter brake, given the stock if you improve the stock, either by putting a butt pad on there or getting another stock, especially an inline type of stock like a Zukov stock, I think you could see a pretty marked difference. If I had to give it a percentage of improvement over the fighter brake that I have on my GF3, I would say it's probably functionally right now maybe a 10% upgrade. It's noticeably better, but not hugely better. I wouldn't think that one is a great advantage over the other one. It will be interesting, though, to see what happens when I get a different stock on this gun, though. I think that having a good stock in combination with a good brake will give me a real significant difference in performance. Alright, so, and then last but not least, in terms of actually being able to shoot this thing and use the sights, it's typical AK sights, so I wouldn't call them fast at all. And the lighting conditions and weather conditions yesterday were not great. One minute it would be sunny, the next minute it would be hailing, the next minute after that it would be raining, and then it would be snowing. We had lots of weather in the same day, which is fairly typical of southern Idaho. We don't have super extreme weather, we don't get hurricanes and monsoons and things like that, but we will get a lot of interesting weather sometimes in the same day, so that was an interesting run around. And so I wasn't able to make all that great a use out of the iron sights, and AK sights in and of themselves are not the easiest for most people to use. So it is kind of what you would expect it to be on that. One thing I did want to mention, though, is that these sights came in high out of the box. At 25 yards, it wouldn't be enough to notice. It was only a couple inches off at 25 yards, but when I took it out to 100, I was basically a full target up from where I wanted to be, a good 8 inches from where I wanted to be, so I had to lower my point of impact quite a bit. And as long as you have an AK sight tool, that's a pretty easy adjustment to make. But other than the elevation issue, as far as windage was concerned, it seemed to be pretty much right on. Not any real significant cant to the sight at all. If anything, I have the front post scooched over just a little bit to the left, so it might not be perfectly in line, but it's certainly within the realm of what can be adjusted using a standard AK adjustment tool, so no major issues there. It's all well within spec. So not really overly concerned. Yeah, they're not the best sights in the world, but it was enough to hit the targets at 100 yards. I didn't save the groups because my groups were not particularly great, and I wasn't shooting very good groups yesterday at all with any of the guns because I brought several guns out and I just wasn't doing good with any of them. But functions within, for me, what you would expect of typical AK sights. So nothing really great to write home about there. Like I said, it was shooting a little high out of the box at 100 yards. Other than that, not really anything to write home about. Basically, typical AK performance that way around. So no, this is not an endurance test. 3 magazines is definitely not enough to tell that. It's not even a super great malfunction test. I did test a lot of different kinds of rounds in one magazine that was just kind of a hodgepodge of all sorts of different things, and it ran fine on that, but that's still just one hodgepodge magazine. So we can't rest too much on that, but in terms of the performance of the parts of the gun as they are right now, we did learn that the brake is very effective at doing what it's supposed to do. The sights are fairly nominal, typical AK sights. They're not absolutely awful. You can learn to use them, but they're not exactly intuitive or very user-friendly compared to a lot of other sighting systems. In terms of the furniture, the handguard actually performed a lot better than I thought it would. That's probably more so just because I'm used to AKs now, and I'm fairly careful about letting my hand go too far forward or too far back. I would not necessarily make that same recommendation for someone who's new to AKs, or if you want an AK for general use for lots of different people, but they're actually not bad. And if you don't need to mount something to it like a light or a vertical grip or something like that, these grips will do just fine. The pistol grip, on the other hand, is definitely a disadvantage with how small a circumference it has. How much of an issue that is going to be for you is going to depend on how you prefer to carry your gun. If you prefer to sling it most of the time, probably not going to be an issue at all. If you're like me and you only sling it sometimes or perhaps never, well, you're going to wind up carrying the gun by the grip pretty often, and all that weight and a fairly small circumference, fairly thin profile, that's going to be kind of annoying. The stock is awful, but easily fixed. Go out, get a shotgun rubber butt pad, one of the 4-inch ones, stick it on the end of that thing, and you should be good to go. Alright, that is my appraisal of how the Palmetto State Armory AK-103 shoots. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.